we don't talk about trauma with each other. We don't acknowledge our trauma, right? When we're not given the space to say, Mom, like, I feel a little uncomfortable, like this shirt's a little too tight, whatever. Let's just, if we keep it about body image, like this is going on. And your mom and your parents respond with something like, you have a roof, you have food on your table. What are you complaining about, right? O quieres algo de que llorar, or whatever, right? And so again, if we don't open up the space, it's all stored. And yes, you're very right. If that is how we're gonna be, that's gonna be our outlet. We need an outlet, right? And so if we can't talk it, if we can't speak it, if we can't feel it.
Hola, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Heal and Manifest podcast. Today, I have a special guest, which I will introduce in a minute. But the topic of today's episode is how body image issues affect men. Body image issues, body dysmorphia. So we're going to talk all about this topic today. But before we move forward, I want to really remind you to give this episode, other episodes from the Heal and Manifest podcast, some love. Share it with your loved ones. Share it with anyone that will benefit from all of this amazing resources and information that I'm bringing here, even with special guests that are taking time of their days to talk about important topics about mental health, about wellness, especially about destigmatizing all of these very important and necessary experiences that a lot of our community experience, right? So don't forget to share the love. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. You can find this on Spotify and on YouTube. And yeah, so let's get started. So I think that, of course, June was men's mental health. And the reason why I think it's important as a woman and as an ally to talk about men's mental health is that I know that, of course, we all have men in our lives. We all have fathers, we all have brothers, we all have cousins, we all have, community of men in our life. And I do think that I'm a genuine believer that when we support women and men's mental health, particularly men's mental health, that we all benefit from it, right? We're all trying to heal, trying to break cycles, trying to do things differently. And I think it starts with bringing awareness about very important topics. And of course, men's mental health is all year round, right? It's not just one particular month. But I did want to bring on this particular topic because I realize that it's not something that we talk enough about or we discuss. Why? Because there's a lot of stigma around even just acknowledging that men struggle with body image issues. A lot of people think that only women are impacted even by beauty standards, but the reality is, like, we all live in this society, this culture that somehow consciously or unconsciously impacts us, right? So I did want to bring on this information and my special guest, which I will introduce in a minute. But I wanted to talk about men's body dysmorphia and experience with body image issues. I did find some very interesting statistics. 40% of men actually experience body image issues, and 54% of men experience body dysmorphia. So I will talk a little bit about what body dysmorphia is. And 50% of men experience eating disorders. And you're probably thinking, wow, I was not aware of that. I didn't know that that was actually a thing. Or maybe you're realizing, like, wow, the audience listening to us, like, oh, I see that. And thank you for naming that, because maybe I've experienced this as a man and I didn't know how to talk about it or have conversations about it with people because I didn't want to seem weak or vulnerable or like that I'm crazy, right? So there's a lot of these continued stigma. I do think that it does definitely come from societal pressures, beauty standards, and heavily focusing on appearance, even on social media. And just to define body dysmorphia, so body dysmorphia is really goes beyond being a mental health condition. It is really linked to a negative self-concept about one's body, right? It's about obsessing over a specific feature or flaws or appearance, even specific body parts. And it really impacts people's ability to even connect to their bodies, or men's ability to connect to their bodies, or just feeling so disconnected, or feeling like it sometimes impacts even their intimacy, their sexual health. It impacts their self-esteem, their self-confidence, or any brings up a lot of distress in their lives. So I wanted to just kind of have that definition, so you have that in the back of the mind as I introduce my guest and as we talk about this topic. Okay, so Cesar Pacheco, thank you so much for waiting as I introduce this topic. Cesar Pacheco is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes working with first gen children of immigrants. He has a deep passion with creating a safe space for individuals that have historically never had the opportunity to process their feelings, their emotions. He has been doing a lot of impactful work in the nonprofit agency world, where he serves and works with former youth and young adults who have experienced being in the foster care system. And thank you, Cesar, for being here, and talk to me a little bit about your experience, maybe a personal story. What made you do this work? What like really inspired you to even thinking about this topic that we're going to be delving into? What got you into this line of work for you?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. That was a nice introduction there. And listen, you don't need me on here. You handle that introduction about the topic. Thank you for that. You made my job so much easier today. Yeah, listen. I think this issue is probably one of the most personal ones that I deal with in my own life. I would say, probably around the age of 8, I started to gain weight, and I come from a long line of big people. We'll say for now, it's in my genes to carry some extra weight, right? And I think when it started to become a thing for me was really just when I would go to my grandma's side on my dad's side, right? At grandma's home on my dad's side. Sorry about that. And, I all of a sudden started to feel like, oh, this lady sees me a little bit different, right? The bigger I got, the more exaggerated her reactions were to my body, right? I remember coming over, and this is, again, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I remember coming over and her pinching the underside of my arms and going, que grandotes estos brazos, right? And like eventually escalating to the point of putting me on the scale to see what I was weighing, having lunches with my cousins, and they'd get whatever she actually cooked, and she'd give me a salad and basically tell me that's what I got to eat, right? And so I think eventually, and it was interesting because I would then go to my mom's side, and it's like, come lo que quieras, mijo, right? Like, no hay pedo, you eat whatever the hell you want. And so I like got to the point where I dreaded going to my dad's mom's house, because I knew that at some point my body was going to be the topic of discussion, right? And so as it happens to most of us, that kind of external criticism eventually starts to become the internal criticism, right? And I think genuinely, for most of my young adulthood, body image was something that I was constantly and exhaustively aware of.
I can't imagine as you being, and thank you so much for sharing this experience. I know that it's such a vulnerable part of your story and your experiences. And I think that when I do hear even clients and people talk about their experience in their relationship to their bodies, sometimes I think it does come from family members, right, making comments about your bodies, or it's either about weight, about appearance, or just even something about like your skin tone, right, or like
Absolutely.
body weight. So and I think a lot of children don't realize in the moment, because as children we are free, we don't have that judgment, but adults carrying their own stuff, their own traumas, their own concepts of themselves, and of course, like, we do live in a society and culture that is fat phobic, that is very much does like looks down upon, people with bigger bodies, fat bodies, right? And I think that it's unfortunate, right? And as you mentioned, this being part of your biology, being part of genetics and all of these things, like, we have to learn to embrace these aspects. But then there's this internalized self-concept and even oppression of like, oh, this is not according to the beauty standards, so therefore that's bad, that's not okay, that's not healthy,
Sure.
right? So I guess I'm curious for you, how, at what point you're like, you realize that something didn't feel right for yourself, like within your body, or maybe you didn't feel like there's all these comments and judgments and you're like, what's going on, what's going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think for me specifically, it was the idea of being so young and feeling like, for lack of a better word, othered, right? I saw the way my grandma treated I'm like her third grandkid. I saw how she treated my two older cousins who are more athletically built than I was, et cetera, et cetera. And so just realizing, oh, this is going to be a thing, right? And to be fully honest, I don't know that anywhere else in life I experienced the same thing, right? I don't know that, other than obviously being the fat kid, you're going to be the last one that's picked for teams and all that stuff. I obviously, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying it's a pretty natural thing we all experience. Not only was I fat, I was also incredibly uncoordinated. Nobody wanted me on their team, right? But I think because of that narrative that already existed, so much became, oh, this is because I'm fat, right? I'm walking and people are whispering, they must be talking about me and how fat I am, right? It must be, there's always, just because again of that voice, that inner voice, it was always, it must be this, right? Obviously now I get, no, it wasn't, right? But yeah, certainly I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
No, yeah, it does. So this sense of like feeling othered kind of like got to you to the point where you were so aware of it, as you mentioned, it was so present in your face that it just made, even like, as you mentioned, part of your narrative and your story and even your identity, right? I think
Absolutely.
like it does bring up this concept of like, because other people see me like this, and of course as a child and even as you grow up, you become very vulnerable to that criticism, other people's opinions, right? This internalized sense of rejection or projection almost becomes your inner voice, your inner dialogue, right, about yourself.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, and I guess I'm curious, based on your experience, your personal experience and also professional experience working. I know you work with youth. Um, what have you noticed based on men experience body dysmorphia or body image issues?
Yeah, it's like I think if you go back even to like 2012 and you look at the data back then, and then you look at data in the last 5-10 years, social media, I mean, we can blame so much of everything going on in life right now on social media, right? But I think for men specifically, because if we're being honest, women got the shit end of the stick when it comes to beauty standards, as you so eloquently said at the beginning. Uh, I think for women, there's no escaping it. We could, I know that's not the topic today, but I know we can do a 12-hour podcast episode on that, right? That I
Yeah.
think men, for the most part, got to escape it, right? There wasn't, other than like Men's Health and like muscle magazines that only like bodybuilders looked at back then, it wasn't so much as in your face as kind of social media has created that culture of this is what the idealized body type is, right? And so I, for like, we'll go to the gym like maybe 3 weeks straight every 4 years and then get over it and then continue that cycle, right? But when I was a younger man, most people were, 20 years and up. And this last time I tried to go into the gym, you've got like 11 and 12-year-olds in there working out with their parents. And I think it's the access to this is what you should look like, because this is what the fitness influencers look like on social media, the accounts you follow. And so I think ends up being just the internalized version of what we want our bodies to look like, for no reason other than that's what just somebody decided.
Exactly. And you know what? Something that I've been reflecting a lot about is about that not a lot of people have social media literacy. And I don't know if you've heard of this term, but it's like people go online and they mindlessly scroll. They don't use their critical thinking skills, their ability to be critical, be like challenged, to question, to be curious. It's almost just like what they see is what they think it's real. And that's literally what happens with even younger generations, or just in general, like anyone. But as if we're talking about men today, men's mental health, it's also like, as you mentioned, we see like the fitness world, the body physique, like this muscle movement, I don't know what you would call it, that that you have to look a certain way. And some people just literally follow social media influencers or like sports influencers, or like, and they don't have the ability to discern and to like question and to be like, hey, well, this is not my reality. Like there's differences, right? And just not just because someone is showing off that this is how people should live, right? There's like almost like this lifestyle, like brainwashing, like because you have to do things like XYZ, and then if you do things in XYZ, then this is what you're gonna get. You're gonna get like a muscular body, and you're gonna be fit and healthy, and people don't kind of discern and somehow start comparing themselves, right? So, and that's actually something, I think this goes back, I think, to social media literacy, is to being able to practice boundaries when you're scrolling online, what you're consuming, right? And to be very mindful and thoughtful about not going into this comparison trap, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I think on across like most topics in contemporary life, right? I think with the you mentioned the body dysmorphia, and again, if you check out the literature, I think most researchers on this topic are very careful to almost not even use the term body dysmorphia when it comes to men. I think it's they've coined the term muscle dysmorphia, and because it's the kind of the opposite of the body dysmorphia typically is we associate it with women, right? With the I'm not thin enough, and they could be a size 2 and they look in the mirror and they think they're 200 pounds, right? And so let me keep going because I don't see what I actually look like. The opposite is true with men, right? And that muscle dysmorphia, like no matter how big some men get, it never feels big enough, right? They never see the reflection of what their actual work is. And so back to a point that you said that I thought that was really interesting is the people not understanding, right? And listen, I'm not shitting on fitness like at all. I think obviously fitness is important, right? But I think that what we don't see is the hours and hours and hours and hours that go into the gym. I mean, I follow a few people, and people are at the gym morning and then at noon and then at night. Like this is an entire absolute lifestyle, right? And even when we talk about like I know you haven't mentioned eating disorders, but when we think about like the bulking and the binge eating and then like the cutting back, and like there's unfortunately so much disordered eating that goes into that too. It just looks prettier.
Yeah. You know what? You brought so many big points, and it makes me think about Thank you for bringing up that the muscle dysmorphia, because it does look different from women versus men,
Yep.
right? And also, I don't come in here with all of these conditions to try to pathologize. I think what I want to do is bring on the awareness and the language, because what happens is a lot of people don't understand the language. They know they're experiencing all of these things. They're maybe aware, but they don't know where to seek help or how to seek help or what is it that they're actually experiencing. So I appreciate you, talking about muscle dysmorphia and how this is a lot more common in men. And yes, I do see it in men too, like going to the gym. You see people that are there for hours and hours. And then, I have had exposure with, men being in the, what's it called? The physique competitions, the
Mm-hmm.
men's physique competition. So, I don't know if you know about this concept around roid rage.
Yep.
Are
Yep.
you aware of that? So
Yes.
there's that too, right? Where men, in order for them, because probably it's a genetic or a biological thing, that of course, like, it's unrealistic to be growing hella muscle naturally like that. I'm sorry. You go to the gym, you see these muscular men, they're probably doing steroids. Okay. And I'm not out here shaming people. I'm just bringing on information, because the thing about, the roid rage, or like this fitness community that, and even like in the men's physique community, there's this concept that obviously, and you have to be very strict with your diet, literally, like, to the gram. You have to count every calorie, every macro, every micro, everything. Plus, like, some men, which I've seen, have taken anabolic steroids, and steroid use, right? Which, if we do know that causes roid rage. And I don't know, and this is not typical for everyone. It's just something that I have seen and I have witnessed. And roid rage is pretty much kind of like maybe certain like symptoms around feeling irritable, feeling excessive anger, inability to self-regulate. It does lead to aggression, which is why it's called roid rage, right? So, and then some of the mental health challenges that do come from that, when people say start reducing its intake or whatnot, there's a lot of physical complications too. Even like depressive episodes, people just are into this high and then they go all the way low. So, and then there's a lot of racing thoughts, a lot of anxiety, depression, and like mania, like hypomania, psychosis. Like, it leads to all of these things because you're putting things in your body, right? It's going to impact your sleep. It's going to impact also your sex drive and libido and all of these things. A lot of people don't talk about that and don't know about that, but it's something that we do see. And this is where we're also seeing a lot of younger men, because they get so desperate to the point where they're like, well, I need to get big ASAP. I need to make this change happen, right? Because I need to feel better about myself.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know much about that, or what is your experience with that?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't have too much experience, but I think based on what I've read and what I understand, you did a great job describing that just then. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, what are other kind of challenges that men or young men would experience when it comes to body image issues?
I think the biggest thing is not even having the awareness that it's an issue, right? So
Mm.
it's, again, because this, I think that the topic of body image in general is so gendered, right? If
Yeah.
let's say I don't have children, but let's say I had kids, right? And I see that my daughter is counting calories and skipping meals. My first thought may be, uh-oh, I hope she's okay. I hope she's not, getting into this diet culture. But if I see my son who's going to the gym and he's cutting calories and he's engaging in the same behaviors, my thought process, my brain, mira, mijo, he's so disciplined. Keep it going, son. Right? That like there's just no awareness. I will say this. I'm speaking from probably more of a heterosexual point of view that I think we can dedicate an entire podcast to the LGBTQIA community and the body image issues there. But I think in quote unquote the hetero world, it's not spoken about. It's such a feminine concept that to talk about your body goes against your masculinity, right? I'm sure you can go to a girlfriend and be like, "Oh my God, your thighs are so good. I hate my thighs. They're so." Not that you would say that, but you get what I'm saying. Where like I would never go to my best friend and be like, "Fuck, dude, these man boobs are getting on my nerves. How are yours feeling?" Right? Like we don't have those conversations, right? And so much of I'm gonna go into a little bit of a different topic here, but so much of like our bodies are men are tend to be like disconnected from our bodies, right? So if my wife's like, "Oh, I've been having this like stomach pain," I'm probably gonna go to the doctor and check it out. Like, "Oh, okay, cool," right? If I have a stomach pain, fucking 3 weeks later, I'm like, dude, I'm on the bathroom floor. My appendix is about to burst because we just have that separation from our bodies. And so we don't spend time connected to them, right? I think another issue, and one that like we never talk about when discussing this topic, is penis size, right? But I think another part between like female bodies and male bodies, you get to see, right? The things that are typically sexualized on a female body, you get to see. You get to walk by somebody and be like, "Oh, she's probably a C cup. I'm a D cup. Okay, we're good." Whatever the hell, right? We're dudes, like the part that we care about the most, we never really see, right? And so we grow up with this and this is one that I see in the therapy room all the time. All the time. Young man who's dating a new girl and they're about to engage in sexual activity for the first time and they're freaking out about, am I going to measure up? What if her last boyfriend had a big penis and mine's, average size or whatever? And all we have when we're growing up, especially we grow up in conservative households, is porn, right? And like porn is like, obviously they're going to hire people who are a little bit more endowed down there. And so it's what we have to compare. And we don't get to go around going, "Hey, let me see your wiener so that I know what I'm basing mine on," right? Exactly. So I think it's such a simplistic topic, but it's also such a multi-layered topic. And when we don't provide the spaces to discuss them, we get stuck in here, right? We get stuck in like, I'm the only one that feels this way about this part of my body. I'm the only one that feels. But when you open up the space, you start to hear, "Oh wait, no, this is a thing."
Oh my gosh, you touched on so many layers that I just want to unpack all of that. But all of this makes so much sense. You talked about body awareness. You're right. Not a lot of men have like we've been talking about that language, right? Where women have been more normalized of like, "Oh, like this hurts," or like we're more, open to talk and vulnerable to talking about certain parts of our bodies, whereas men are like, there's no language, like you said, right? It's like there's no language, there's a lot of disconnection. And this is where we do see where a lot of men do struggle with even going to get checked, because it's not socially and culturally as normalized or accepted. It's more of like, "I'm fine, hasta que le está pasando algo," y se está, they're in the bed and they're like, "Oh shit, now I do need to go to the hospital or the doctor." So there's almost, as you mentioned, that like huge disconnection, and also the sexuality and the intimacy. I think there's so much pressure, and I do see that a lot in men, where there's this pressure to perform, and somehow even like that is also disconnected, right? Because if someone already comes into an intimate moment, or like meets someone and they start having sex or whatnot, they perhaps are so disconnected, they don't even know like how to connect, how to focus it's a lot of like performative, like I need to make sure that I perform like this, I do good, so that way, she feels satisfied. So there's like this kind of performative aspect
Yeah.
of their sexuality and intimacy, and that's also going to be impact men's sense of body autonomy or being disconnected to their bodies. And I think those are all multi-layered aspects, as you talked about, like penis size and all of these things. This is all interconnected when it comes to body image, how men perceive their bodies. So I think I definitely want to also mention how the societal cultural pressures to try to fit in, to try to look a certain way. I do want to definitely mention, like how trauma also impacts our ability, or even men's ability to connect to their bodies, to understand body autonomy, to understand even consent. Because something that we don't also talk about is that men also do experience even sexual trauma, right? And a lot of people don't think that happens. Not even sexual trauma, just trauma in general, other forms of
Sure.
adversity. Right. It definitely disconnects men from their bodies. And this is where a lot of men retrieve to substance abuse, to porn, to gambling, a lot of addictive behaviors and patterns. But also, like just being completely disconnected from that and not knowing how to like feel safe, right? And engaging in numbing and just self-destructive coping mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a spot on thing to say, right? Because again, listen, it's that's not what we talk about. We don't talk about trauma with each other. We don't acknowledge our trauma, right? I mean, you've seen those memes, especially like in our community, right? Like, hola tía, ¿cómo está? Pues aquí con esta pierna hinchada que ya no puedo ni caminar. Y aquí tratando de pues tener comida y mantener todo, pero pues gracias a Dios todo bien, right? And it's like, you just described a whole bunch of stuff, right? And so again, when we're not taught the language, right? When we're not given the space to say, Mom, like, I feel a little uncomfortable, like this shirt's a little too tight, whatever. Let's just, if we keep it about body image, like this is going on. And your mom and your parents respond with something like, you have a roof, you have food on your table. What are you complaining about, right? O quieres algo de qué llorar, or whatever, right? And so again, if we don't open up the space, it's all stored. And yes, you're very right. If that is how we're gonna be, that's gonna be our outlet. We need an outlet, right? And so if we can't talk it, if we can't speak it, if we can't feel it, let me drown it in whatever the hell is, I guess, what I enjoy the most, right?
And you know what? Yes, you did bring up the topic around masculinity, right? And how a lot of it is like if men talk about or open up or become vulnerable about certain insecurities that they're experiencing, that's also frowned upon. It's like, ¿qué nos importa? O sea, like you're saying, you have a roof over your head, tienes esto, tienes otro, like ponte a hacer algo productivo, y no te quejes. So there's like a lot of invalidation, and it just makes sense why a lot of men don't open up and don't have a safe spaces to open up and be vulnerable and create dialogue about these things. So I guess what are some of the practical tips or things that you would recommend for men to do if they're struggling, with body image issues or muscle dysmorphia or anything in between?
I think that's such an individual journey for each person, right? I think for me, it was doing some very hard research on finding a male therapist who had experience with body image, which try looking them up, right? And really, really opening up the space to be able to like dig into that shame, right? And if it's not a therapist, then find a friend try opening up to someone, right? But then, you know, the other part is if a man does open up to you, right? That was kind of like the interesting part about this last men's mental health is one of the messages I wish I heard more is like the responsibility on the other party, right? That if I come to you and I try to open up and you invalidate my feelings, you lost your shot of ever getting me to open up to you again. Like I will
Yeah.
absolutely never come close to talking on whatever feelings I'm experiencing, right? And so the same thing I think with body image is if you can just find the courage to open up to someone and that person can not only validate but then also normalize the experience, because I think I see probably 98% men in this space, and 99% of them have opened up about their body image in one way or another, right? And yeah, I think it's finding that safe space. Find the
Yeah.
safe space, right? And realize you're not alone.
Yeah. And you're right about finding that safe space because what I often see is that they do open up and then there's a lot of invalidation. Or, you know, sometimes what I find when there's a lot of even internalized machismo, even in women, okay, because this is not a gender thing, this is
No,
something that we all internalize, right? So if a man comes to their partner who is a woman, they're like, oh, you know, I don't feel very comfortable with my body. I feel like, you know, my self-esteem is pretty low. I want to work on this. Sometimes what happens if that person, that partner, that woman is not in a space where she has the ability to hold space for you, the ability to be compassionate, understanding, um, she might be like, oh, this is weak, you know, this is like, I don't know how I feel about that. And there's going to be a sense of insecurity even around about her, and like in her being able to trust like the partner, right, him. And I'm not saying that this is of course to shame anyone or guilt trip anyone, but I think that not everyone is going to be that safe space,
no.
right?
Oh, I would say
Finding
most people aren't going to be that safe space, unfortunately.
exactly, exactly. So I, like as you mentioned, finding a sense of community, men who are also on their healing journey. I do find that men who are, you know, reclaiming, redefining, unlearning, healing, breaking cycles, who are doing their inner work,
Yep.
and not everyone is doing that, you know, find those people, because they're going to be more open to being vulnerable, to having these difficult, uncomfortable conversations, and they're going to create that space for you. And of course it's not going to be everyone, as I said, but like, it's, you got to start somewhere, you know.
Yep.
And I think being open and vulnerable does require taking a risk, and this is something that I do tell a lot of my clients. It's, you know, being vulnerability definition is taking a risk, is knowing, is being okay with the unknown and the uncertainty that comes from that, and being okay with not knowing the outcome, because at the end of the day you're learning, or if not, you know who you are. And if for whatever reason is having the courage to open up, and if you realize, well, you know what, it's okay, this is not the right person, let me move forward with other person or other community or people that may be a good fit for me, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And also, like, I was thinking in terms of tips, and as we're talking about what are ways to kind of work through some of these insecurities, is to also like start questioning, start asking yourself, start thinking critically about, where did you learn all of these like beauty
Yeah.
standards? You know, where do you think your mom, your dad, your tia, your abuela learned this? Like, I think that at the end of the day, we are all part of these systems, these structures, you know, these beauty standards, consciously or unconsciously. And the ones doing the work, they're going to understand that we are all kind of been impacted by them. Not, some people are aware of it, some people are not. Like, and as you become more aware of it, as you're working on yourself, is realize, like, I think that there's so much power and empowerment in you coming to your own conclusions and redefining, what feels good for you, what doesn't. You don't have to follow these norms, these status quo, these beauty standards. You Part of this healing process is like healing your relationship with yourself, with reconnecting to your body, reclaiming different parts of you, is radically accepting who you are, right? And it does require a lot of unshedding and like breaking certain patterns and belief systems that are no longer serving you.
Yep.
And that's going to require you to think a little bit outside the box.
Yeah, that's such a great point that you bring up, Cynthia, because I think, even as a full grown adult, I existed in a office space for 17 years, right? And for those 17 years, I was surrounded by people who, I'm not going to say all of them did, but certainly surrounded by quite a few people who had such internalized hatred of their bodies. I couldn't help but take that in, right? I couldn't help but almost have that shame triggered again. And so that led to some, let me choose my words more carefully. That led to some intense, intense eating disorder. I got my body down to like a weight that I is incredibly unsustainable, unhealthy, and that was all to kind of fit within their narrative of what a body should look like, right? I stepped out of that space and was like, what was I doing, right? And I think, listen, and I think if we like as a therapist, I now understand the responsibility of owning all this stuff, right? Like owning what my body looks like, respecting what my body looks like, and showing my clients who are sitting right across from me, like, look, I can sit here and I'm not going to tug at my shirt, and I'm not going to like sit here and try to twist my body into a way where it looks a little bit more presentable. Like, this is it as is. Let's go. Right? And so the hope is that if I can do that, if I can demonstrate, if I can show you, I can be comfortable in this skin after years and years and years of struggling with it, we can get you there too. So I think it's like those of us that are in this position to work with men, if we can model some of that, that alone is going to make a huge difference, right? I mean, listen, I get to be the first person for so many of my guys that say that says so many different things to them, that if I can also be that first person and be like, dude, your body's good. Your body's good, right? Let's work on longevity and making sure that our health stays good. But like, also, your body's legit, And here's the thing, right? I loved what you said, because it's all about those systems that we allow ourselves to stay in, right? That like the reality is like somewhere out there, and I hope this isn't too terrible of a thing to say, but like somewhere out there, I'm looking at somebody who maybe weighs 50 pounds less than I do, is a little bit more muscular, and every once in a while I'm like, fuck, dude, like I wish I looked like that guy sometimes, right? And then somewhere out there is somebody who weighs 400 pounds that looks at me and goes, fuck, I wish I looked like that. And then somebody out there is 600 pounds that looks at that guy that weighs 400 pounds and goes, God, I wish I looked like that, right? That it's like, at some point, you just have to do the work to be good with where you...
Yes. And that there's so much power in that. There's so much power in that. And I think, and so much healing. And it does come to the point of like radically accepting yourself and giving yourself a lot of grace, a lot of self-compassion as you're unlearning and shifting and reframing your relationship with your body, your relationship with yourself, your self-respect, your self-integrity, your worth and your value, which has nothing to do with your beauty, the freaking beauty standards or how you look. It has to do from who you really are, and in your character. And I think that that's something that we need to put more emphasis. And as you were talking, it made me think about how in this process and in this journey, you're going to be required to set a lot of boundaries with family, with friends, with people around you, with the tia, the tío, the abuela, even your partner, right? That may make comments about your body, and it's going to be all out of respect, out of love, but you're going to have to set those boundaries,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of people don't think, well, we are taught, for women, we're taught that we need to set boundaries, don't talk about my body, don't do that. But for men, I don't know if that's kind of, if that's what men are taught. But I do think that, setting boundaries, if someone's making a comment about your body, or just comment about like fat phobia and all of these things about what you're eating, your lifestyle, like, you have to communicate that you're not okay with that, or remove yourself, or say, hey, I think that's unnecessary. I don't like that comment. Please don't say that. Or I will have to remove myself, or I may not be part of this. Like, boundaries is about protecting yourself, maintaining relationships if they're healthy, and if that's what you want. That's what boundaries are. And I do think that those are very necessary. But not only that, boundaries about what you consume online, boundaries about
Yes.
practicing, yeah, boundaries about practicing discernment. Not what you see online is, it's like the entire reality and the absolute truth. So stop comparing yourself, stop going into that kind of like rabbit hole, stop talking about yourself negatively. Those are boundaries too, right? Emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, boundaries with social media and technology, all of these things. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a great thing, right? I remember when I after having lost all the weight and then starting to put it back, I remember I hadn't seen this lady who just came to the center that I used to work at, and she seems like, "Ay, ¿qué te pasó?" Right, with first words out of her mouth, and I remember pinche raza, right? And I remember thinking like, I have a choice here, right? I have a choice. I can
Yeah.
either laugh, I can laugh along with her and be like, nah, pues ya ve, and then go back to my desk and feel like complete shit about me. Or I can take this
Mm.
opportunity to be like, con todo el respeto que se merece, mi cuerpo no está para la
Mm.
discusión. Y ya,
Exacto. Y
right?
period. Ya, hasta ahí. No tienes que
Yep.
hacer ningún comentario. But it's like, si estás de una manera, ¿qué te pasa? Si estás de la otra, pero ¿qué te pasó? So like, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
A
So people are always
100%.
people are always going to talk, but
Yep.
you're not here to live up to people's expectations. You're not here to live up to these like beauty standards. You're not, your life and your worth is not up to discussion. It's not up to what other people think or project about you. No, you're here to live your life to the fullest, and that is taking care of you and loving yourself in the best way possible and going from there.
I think that radical acceptance part that you said is it's so
Yeah.
powerful, right? Because the reality is I'm never gonna be 6'2". I'm never gonna be the light skinned galan from the novelas, right? My ass is always gonna like the pinche jardinero that's outside in the back, like taking care of the horse stables, right? And that's
Yeah.
okay. That's what I
Yeah.
was born to look like,
Yeah.
right? There's certain, yes,
Exactly.
sure. I mean,
Yeah.
ooh, you know what we didn't talk about, and we don't have to. I would have loved to have thrown in something about like cosmetic surgeries, right? Like, and the rise of
Oh,
how like men are
yeah.
are put in. Anyway,
That is another episode,
yep,
another, part two of that, because this is what I've seen too in men.
yep,
Is like, they feel like so flawed in certain body parts that they're like, ooh, I can't even see myself in the mirror. I can't look at myself. I need to go through this cosmetic and this surgery. And they do.
yeah.
And then they end up, probably feeling good, or maybe not feeling good enough, like it's not enough.
Because
And
if we're
it's
not,
like it
no, no, no,
yeah.
please, 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 go for it.
And it's like this never ending cycle,
Yes,
that your self-worth, your self-esteem it should not be based off how you look, because that's going to be empty. And this happens to women too. Okay, like I said, this is
happens to
part
women
two.
mostly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, yeah. What were you going to say?
No, I think I was going to say something along the lines of what you said, right? That oh my gosh, now I lost my train of thought. But just this part where I cut you off, and I apologize for that, is
Mhm.
that, it happens to women too. I said, no, it happens to
Yeah.
women mostly, right? I
Oh,
think
yeah.
men,
Yeah.
men, again, in the last 10, 15 years, are just barely starting to get a taste of what you all have had to go through for the last 75 plus years.
Exactly. And we're all living this human experience. We all experience it similarly and differently at the same time. We're all part of this society and culture, and beauty standards, and it's unfortunate, right? This is where there's a lot of human suffering, and I think that
So
as
much.
the work that you're doing, it's amazing. Thank you so much for being here, because you're bringing on this awareness that in this conversation and dialogue that a lot of men will benefit. So I do appreciate you sharing your story, um, and opening up and being open and vulnerable about this in your experience, but also in your professional expertise lens, sharing that with us. Where can our audience follow you, or work with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I think. Thank you. Well, I'll answer your question. It's basically we're on Instagram at OC Mental Health Associates. It's pretty much
Okay.
what my social media presence is. And also, listen, I think this is amazing. Thank you for the opportunity to sit here with you and discuss this. And yeah, I don't claim to be an expert in this because I don't know that there are any experts in through the male lens. Uh, but I appreciate you letting me share at least the little parts that I know.
Of course, of course. Well, thank you so much, Cesar. And thank you, everyone who tuned into this episode. Share the love, share with your loved ones. Like I said, follow, subscribe, like it, tag us when it is out. And yeah, we'll be seeing you on the next episode. Adios.